Hello everyone, welcome back to part 6 of the leather and metal tutorial of this horse harness. So last week we did some more work on the side and also established some darker values around here and also worked a bit on the details and everything, and also kind of starting to get those last layers in before we start working on the final details. So in today's video we are going to work on this side, and also the stitching and mostly the metal work. I think if we put in another good 3 hours we might even reach the end. I'm saying might because I know myself, I can either get very slow with the final details or things can speed up quite significantly towards the end. But I think this is going to be one of those pieces where things might actually start to speed up once we get those final little layers in and everything. So yeah, it might be a little bright, the overall look, because it's still, the sun hasn't truly come up. Well, it's up, but it's not, the lighting's not that fantastic yet. So we are gonna get stuck in with this side, do some work on the metal. So I was quite pleased with, it didn't seem like we got much done in the last part, but those kind of initial layers can either come together very quickly or they can almost look like you're going nowhere. But yeah, so I'm just gonna sharpen up my pencils. Well, pencil. This is an HB pencil that I've got here. Let me just see where I'm going to go first. I think I'm gonna start. Let's start here. So my starting points, once the drawing is kind of filled in, my starting points, it doesn't really matter where you start. I kind of just pick a point of interest really, and then go from there basically. So we are now, I'm following the same principle as what we normally do, is we just look at our darkest values first, and we are just continuing to clean up as we go along, sharpening up our edges, defining everything. There's still some definition to be had in certain areas, especially in this area where you've got a lot of stuff going on. It becomes very important to define everything really. I'm just going to put this so that it's not that shiny and distracting, sorry. There you go. Just to, much better, and I can actually rest my hand. So for your metal, we're just continuing that same method of looking at your darkest areas, defining them, and then doing a little bit of blending just to get rid of that white of the paper. And then once you use the mono eraser in that area, it will have a bit more of a punch to it. Because honestly, if you've got a lot of white paper left, there's no way that you can create a highlight. You can use it as your highlight, but I feel sometimes when you're working in smaller areas, you just sometimes need that extra space to properly blend things out. So then I don't mind just doing the extra work to get in some of the highlights. So I'm just taking the mono razor. And with these highlights, I don't mind making them larger than they actually would have been, or they're actually supposed to be, because you can easily use your pencils to kind of narrow them out again. So I'm just also going to use the mono razor here to kind of lighten up the space, because there is some reflection of the metal onto what's underneath it. I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge to get that texture to look different than metal. But luckily it's just a small area, so it's not that big of a train smash. Back in with my HB. Might have to lighten up this area as well, because it's not that different in value to the surrounding metal. Sometimes I like to, in my kind of deepest areas, put the pencil down and then blend it out. Especially if it's not a continuous same depth all around. And if maybe, I feel like the HB can maybe be a bit too dark, maybe I have a little bit too much depth, and that just also helps kind of fix that feeling. The pencil having too much oomph, really. And that's where you need to use a blending stump that's a little bit cleaner, so that you don't actually add even more depth unnecessarily yet. Because I feel like you're kind of in this maze of a lot of stuff. You need to build it up slowly. Otherwise you just can get out of hand quite quickly, I feel, and overwhelming. So obviously, if you've kind of played around a bit more or longer on the piece than I have, you could have easily have started to kind of refine your steps a little bit more, especially if you're confident in a certain area. So yeah, I absolutely kind of encourage playing around with your drawings, even if you are following along to the tutorial. Just kind of seeing if you feel, especially if you're new to a certain thing, or maybe you feel like you can spend a little bit more time on it, or you need, especially if you need to spend a little more time on certain areas that you couldn't quite figure out yet. Because these tutorials, I kind of feel like you can absolutely follow to a T. Only work on the drawing if a new part drops. But I absolutely feel like if you kind of get into the groove with the drawing and just use the tutorials as guides, I totally encourage that actually, to kind of play around and see how you feel. If you really like the drawing and you feel confident that you can kind of manage the textures by yourself, I mean, yeah, totally go for it. This is more of a visual. I know there are some people that absolutely love to see the process. I'm one of those people. If I watch a tutorial, I kind of I fast forward, or I just kind of watch what I need and then I fill in the gaps from there. Once I see how they get things going, then I'm like, okay, no, I understand. I'm with you now. Definitely not always a by the book person. So that's basically how I would do it. But everyone learns differently, everyone approaches these types of tutorials differently. So yeah, it's kind of, I put these out there just because I quite like documenting the process. And when you're starting out a new medium, you can be quite lost. Or when I didn't even have YouTube when I started. I basically just did it. YouTube tutorials, didn't watch it. I don't even think I had a phone. I could watch videos, but it wasn't. We're talking about 11 years ago now, when I started with graphite pencil. So it was absolutely a trial by error type of thing. Didn't watch videos. Had Instagram, but then it was OG Instagram, where it was very much more photo content, not videos, which I secretly still prefer. Don't get me wrong, I love video content, but I got rid of TikTok and all of that just to, it wastes my time basically. And it works for some people, but I think when you really want to convey a certain technique, yeah, short form content works very well for quick, but you kind of can't really explain the meat and bones of it. So I do quite like actually sitting down and filming every step. I can easily just draw this at my own pace, put it in a time lapse, and explain over top what I'm doing. But I know myself very well. That works for some people that are very good at getting their point across in shorter form content. That's why my short form content is a bit everywhere and not really consistent. I am working on ideas. I've got ideas in my mind for shorter stuff. That's why I'm also doing the sketch, kind of how to draw sketch long videos. But for me, I find it a lot easier to explain why I do the things that I do if I do it real time. Probably along the lines, once I get better at taking what's in my mind and putting them into words, I definitely do want to turn the time lapses, especially the ones that I've already done, the labby, the snow leopard, and do like a quick time lapse with kind of a tips and tricks voiceover. But I'll probably start doing that nearer to the end of the year. I mean, it's silly season. I don't know if it's like that in other countries, but in South Africa we call it silly season. This time of year, everything just, it's a lot happening. There's a lot happening. There's really so much stuff happening, and also in the work that I do, it also is a time where a lot of stuff happens. It's harvesting season is coming up for the winter grains and everything, so busy time of the year. So definitely that's kind of the plan for the new year, to kind of do that as well, along with the fully set out minute by minute tutorials with the time lapse for people that maybe are like me and don't watch every second of a tutorial, don't need every second of a tutorial to kind of play around, or they just need a quick tip. It's almost like a clue in your puzzle. Why am I picking up the same pencil? I just picked up the Krita Colors HB. For kind of have the explanations for both types of learners, to have that type of explanation as well. Just for the people that maybe just need that quick little tip. I'm not going to edit that all down into the shorts. I'm terrible at that. That will probably stay the most underutilized part of my platform, is the shorts. I just don't have the time. I just don't have the patience to edit videos. And that's because how I film these is I record them direct in OBS, and then maybe if I don't, these last couple I've been able to sit down for the full time and do it in one go. Then it's easy. I just take the file and upload it. So that for me is also what's very nice about these longer form minute by minute tutorials. It requires minimal extra effort, because I'm in that point of kind of my drawing where I need to not baby it, but I need to protect it. When I streamed on Twitch, it started to feel like work. It was almost an extra effort type of thing. Yes, you're drawing, yes, you're talking, but it's more of a live interaction. And Twitch is very much one of those things where you kind of need to keep a schedule. Not always very good at that. because I like the flexibility. If it's too rigid, then I start to feel stuck and then I want to kind of hide away and not do it anymore. Whereas if I've got that kind of play, kind of leeway, it's more fluid. This is an F pencil, by the way. I don't even know if I said that. Then it's a lot easier for me to kind of keep the art flowing. Then it stops feeling like work and I'm like, okay, I'm really enjoying this. I find this fun. Kind of, I can draw this if I want today. If I'm not in the mood, I can maybe just do something else. So I quite enjoy the kind of freedom YouTube actually offers me more. There's still a lot of potential, but that's just, I kind of need to do it slowly. I've realized this year that I should stop diving in completely headfirst, full throttle for everything, because I have a tendency to do that. So this is basically the way I'm doing it on YouTube protects kind of my art flow, my kind of love for doing it as art, as a hobby. I don't what's the word? I don't rely on my art to keep me afloat financially. I am building YouTube to kind of have, that's the plan, to have it as a passive kind of income. Commissions, I will do them if people ask, but I don't push it because I'm currently in that space where I do kind of love the freedom to explore, because I'm now exploring different subjects. I'm exploring larger pieces, which these drawings I will frame, put up probably in a gallery somewhere. And if someone wants to buy it, then someone wants to buy it. If not, I am going to absolutely enjoy it in my own home. I don't really mind. I've kind of made my peace with how I feel about my art, and my art is absolutely a passion and a relaxation and a stress reliever. So I don't want to make it become a stressful thing in my life. So what you see currently on YouTube absolutely works for me, and I do enjoy creating the tutorials. I don't think I would do in-person teaching for reasons. I have my reasons. But this kind of allows me to share the knowledge without actually being rigid in a kind of time slot with a person actually being there. And it's kind of more of a freedom for the learner and the teacher, basically. And it's free. It's for free. Which I think is very nice. There's very few things in life that are truly for free. And I feel like art should be one of those things that should be accessible to everyone. Even those that think maybe they're not good enough at it, I think it should totally be encouraged to be practiced by everyone, even if you think you can't even draw a stick figure. It's one of those skills that can be picked up at any time. It can be worked on. It's one of those skills that I feel like everybody can learn and definitely have improvement on. So you can start out, I'm just going to say it, an absolute terrible drawer, but with patience and work and understanding of your chosen medium, it's one of those things that definitely can get better, and I think you can absolutely become very good at it. Um, I feel like there are certain mediums that maybe do require a bit more creativity, a bit more out of the box thinking, but color theory, knowing how values work, knowing how contrast work, knowing what makes something realistic, understanding anatomy and shapes, those are all things that everyone can learn. It's very much, it's a technique thing. It's like learning anything. It's like if you want to start learning how to code, it's or learning a new language. It's not, there's no special skill required to it. Just patience and hard work. Everyone can learn how to do it. So that's basically how I feel about art, and that's partly the reason why I share it, because I feel like it's one of those skills that everyone can develop. If you may be retiring or you've got a lot of time on your hands and you don't know what to do with yourself, I think it's definitely among those types of things that I would advocate as something to be picked up, just due to the variety that one can do, the absolute plethora. And I'm including all types of arts and crafts. I'm even including, I've recently this year picked up crocheting, which I find, oh damn, it's enjoyable. My granny tried to teach me how to knit like years ago. The two needles thing, that does not work for me, but the crochet, I absolutely enjoy it. And that also gives me something to do with my hands if I'm sitting on the couch. Because there are some days where I just don't, this is an HB pencil, still just mainly focusing on the dark areas, even though I'm actually just going on autopilot. But yeah, it's nice I like to keep my hands busy, even when I'm not feeling like doing anything. And crochet absolutely offers that type of outlet where I can absolutely, if I want to veg on the couch and do nothing, I can still keep my hands busy. Art is also one of those things I will generally maybe put on a series if I'm not filming or something. You put on a series, you watch stuff, and you draw. You don't always pay full attention to maybe your drawing or full attention to whatever you're watching, but it's a way to not just sit idle when you want to do nothing. I see art as that stress reliever, so it's absolutely something that I can do when I don't want to do anything. Especially if I'm drawing something like now, where you kind of go on autopilot and I know what I'm doing. You kind of have the kind of knowledge that gives you the ability to not have to think through it. If this was, say, the line drawing with all the foliage, this would absolutely be more work, because it requires a bit more mental gymnastics, more figuring out of what I'm doing, more paying attention. But yeah, so that's kind of just, long story short, I do this because it's a stress reliever, but I also am doing it in such a way that I can share it without losing the enjoyment of it, really. And I find YouTube is one of those nice platforms where you're absolutely in control. You can take it all the way business forward, which I don't see the need in doing right now. I mean, I'm making no money off this at all. I haven't reached YouTube's minimums for ads or even memberships or anything like that. But I've kind of made my peace with it. It will come with just continuous work. I mean, this channel stood still last year. It only really picked up this year from just me figuring out 4B pencil, me figuring out actually what I want to do with it. So yeah, I've kind of found a groove. I enjoy the sound of drawing videos. That very much to me is kind of a nice in between for when I want to draw and film it without actually having to say a word, which is nice. Sometimes I sit in silence and just listen to the sounds as well. Other times I've got my earphones on and I'm listening to stuff. Generally stuff that doesn't require me to pay attention. So that would be any type of either live stream, or I watch CrossFit or a horse show, or maybe a series I've watched a million times. But I just automatically knows what's going on. So that to me, the sound of drawing is a happy medium for me to put out content without adding workload to it. It's easy, it's quick, and it's also a way of me of sharing progress on the larger drawings, which the larger drawings, it takes, especially the way I do things, it takes a lot of time. I would love to film one start to finish, but at this moment I kind of don't always work at a time where lighting is good for filming, or maybe it's just 20 minutes and then I have to move on, or kind of that's just the attention I have for that kind of moment. So that's the happy medium. The how to draw is, I think, just fun. I need to sketch more. I think it's kind of a challenge in itself for me. And then these A4 tutorials is more the workhorse, but still enjoyable. Definitely still enjoyable. So yeah, sharing art. That's kind of the plan. That's just, I figured out I like doing it. So like sharing the passion. I've got knowledge in my brains that needs to get out. And yeah. If I'm not going to do commission work, I might as well do something else with it. So this is definitely it. So HB pencil. I think I'm going to start working a bit on the stitching. This is the more, I would say, easier of the two sides. So I'll probably not ramble as much now. I've said kind of my piece. There's always one kind of talking point in each tutorial. Or I kind of just go off track and need to say something and then I'm done. And then I can go back to actually focusing on telling you what I'm doing and not just autopiloting it So I just added some depth, not a lot, even though I had the 4B in my hand. I was being very careful because there is some reflections and it looks like patterned leather because it's very shiny and smooth. But that I'm going to kind of do in conjunction with the metal, just to kind of have that quick balance of values. So what am I going to take for you? I'm going to take the H pencil. The F is going to be, I think, a little bit too much first. So I'm just going to, I've got so many pencils, but there are some essentials of my colors that I need to stock back up on. And I want to get the entire missing set for the Staedtlers. I mean, I'm more of a pencil hoarder, really. I just like having more than one around because I lose them in the mess. So I'm going to take my H pencil. We're going to start at this top one first. Basically, this is not going to be very similar to what we did here, because here I had to kind of map it out start to finish. This one is already mapped out and it is a lot larger. Well, not a lot larger, but somewhat more, there's more space for me to work with. So we're gonna do that. I'm gonna start with the red stitching because it's the darker of the two. And we're gonna keep in mind that almost braid-like shading. And I think way back, this is me going on a tangent, sorry. I think way back down in my video list, I did a braid tutorial. It's like way back. Oh yeah, like 6 years ago. I need to do, that's actually a very nice, wouldn't have been very good, I think, because it's just a time lapse. It's actually not a explanation. But it's very much the same principle to a braid. I've already got the next 2 full-length tutorials planned out. I just haven't decided which one will come first. So I'll probably do a poll on my channel and maybe Instagram as well. So they're both going to be subjects that I haven't done before, different textures again, because texture tutorials I think is probably very important. So yeah, I'm gonna make a poll on probably soon, and then start filming that out. Maybe I should just do the one first, because I don't think they're both going to take long. These tutorials, I don't think I'll ever do an in-depth tutorial that won't take me forever. I've kind of just made my peace with it. The one is definitely going to take a lot longer. Absolutely. This is a 4B pencil. I'm just kind of fixing the negative space here. The one is going to be very in-depth texture. It's going to be a very difficult texture, but a very fun one because it's going to be the crocodile. I did a little short on kind of a little progress of it. I'm going to redo that. So that's something that a texture that I've already kind of played around with, but it's a reference that I want to redo as an in-depth tutorial. So I'm going to restart that drawing, and then the other one is one that I've also done but never completed, but I'm only going to do a part of the reference for 2 separate tutorials, but it's going to be one drawing. So it's going to be cloth material, smooth texture. So we're going to start with the simpler textures, because obviously once you go into materials like clothing, you get the smoother ones, and then you get the knit texture, which is awful. It's a repeating pattern. And then what I absolutely love to draw, but I don't draw enough, is hands. I find that's also one of those tutorials that I think a lot of people can benefit from, because it's also kind of one of those tutorials that can be applied to other things. So that is the next 2 tutorials that will definitely be coming to the channel. In what order, I don't know. I might do... Running them together is not going to work for my brain, but I might draw them together and just post them one after the other. So that's the plan for the next 2. So I've already got those 2 plans, and that will keep us busy for the rest of the year. Maybe even into January, especially with the sound of drawing videos and the how to draws in between. And maybe some other short, like I said, with the time-lapse kind of tips and tricks, explanations, on a quick version on how to draw those things type of videos. But yeah, that is the plan. And then I'm not going to plan farther than that, because then there's too many options. Way too many options. Okay, so now there's kind of... We're at that point where these values are similar, that one needs to be a little bit careful on how much you can put in. That's kind of the problem if you work in the manner that I do, is you can't always complete an area fully kind of in that layer step, due to similar values surrounding it, just so that it doesn't get lost. So I'm just taking it in. So I'm just doing that very simply. So you've got your darker line. It's actually not as dark as I'm putting it in, but just for definition's sake, I am kind of exaggerating the shadows and the shading for now. So close to the white you've got your darker, and into the white stitching you've also got some nice shading. Now this rivet, same as every other of the metal pieces, you pick your most prominent highlights and shadows, and fill it in the correct shape. Obviously, you now need to kind of suggest a dome like shape. Okay, rest of stitching. Gonna focus on the red first and just make sure that I've got these shapes all figured out. Ooh. And correct. So also, because with the way I layer, the materials and the textures also kind of look similar. Because even if they have the same values, it's kind of, yes, their texture and the way that texture interacts with your light source that will differentiate it from the surrounding stuff, even if it has similar values. So with my technique, obviously I don't put a lot of details in the early layers. So you kind of have to find other ways to differentiate your different areas without having the use of your details to help balance it out. Just going to shade in the red. I'm going to keep the white stitching blank for now. And just fill in the red so that for myself, it's easier to follow what's going on. So I'm basically just coloring them in. That's what I'm doing. And also just defining this bottom edge. Obviously the cleanup process is continuous, so I'm not too worried about kind of the shapes being a bit maybe sloppy or slightly incorrect or more square than they are supposed to be. But as long as they kind of move in the right direction, it's completely fine. So just also defining the top edge of those white stitches. and the bottom ones as well. This is very much one of those types of details that is a lot easier to draw if you've got more space. But we don't always afford ourselves that luxury. And you don't always have that choice. Especially if you do commission work, then you're kind of at the mercy of what your client can afford. So just using the negative spaces as well to help out with the shapes. Because it gets a bit sloppy here at the back. Just going to blend out because the lines kind of mess with my eyes ever so slightly. Okay. Now let's do some work on what I assume is bells. So now I'm going to start developing the values surrounding this area and work my way in. So what I'm kind of thinking is do the bells, do the rivets, then deepen up this link along with the surround. Then once I deepen up the link, I can deepen up the surrounding area, which means then I can do the rivets, which means I've got more values to play around with in the stitching. So that's kind of my thought process at the moment. So that's also one reason why I move around a drawing a lot. It's a way to help me kind of navigate the values and how do I put this? Kind of helps me get them correct if I know. It's very much like if you've watched a how to draw episode where I pick a reference point to work off of the rest of the drawing. That for that instance it proportion and angles. For this is I pick kind of what is my main kind of object that defines the values surrounding it. What will be my reference objects, values for everything else. So For me, I'm thinking the bells because it's lower area, it's a bit darker, it's got a bit more contrast, and then obviously the same applies to the metal link chain because that will determine the value for the leather underneath, and then everything else will kind of follow from there. So you kind of also need to think of your drawing in that regard, is what is your determining kind of source of your values. This is a 4B pencil, and what area is going to make it the easiest for you to get your values correct. Because yeah, you can work from one side and then use that as your reference point, but it doesn't mean that you generally work from the side with the most, how do I put this? If you worked from a side that's out of focus and not as heavily contrasted, you obviously are going to have to have a different determining focus point. You have to continuously be sure that you are building the correct depth until your focus kind of most detailed contrasted area might be on the completely other side of the drawing, and you have to build up all these areas till you get there, if you work in kind of that manner. Whereas I can't work in that way, because I prefer to have a reference point for all the areas. Obviously, you've got your main focus point, your main kind of draw towards the drawing. But I like to, for smaller areas, kind of divide them up to determine more subtle differences in values, to kind of define them within each other, even if they kind of with a quick glance look to be completely the same in their exposure and their contrast. So yeah, that's kind of the way one of the reasons why I work everything together, is that I can have that option for smaller areas to concentrate on a different focus element each time to determine that area's kind of values. Especially in a reference like this, where your light source is very much directed from one side and not full face from one, where everything kind of lands in the same way. I hope that makes sense. So this side's exposure and contrast is going to look different to this side's. And even the middle will be different because it kind of connects to both areas, which is more in the dark and out of focus, and this one is very much in the light and exposed. So I like to kind of have the options of having different reference points for my values. And that's probably the reason why it takes so long to draw these, because I don't just draw from one side, complete it, and then call it a day. Doesn't mean that other artists don't go over their work again at the end. But to me, it's a lot easier that way. And it also helps in other drawings if you work on a smaller scale to be able to figure out, you know, what is the thing that draws the eyes first. That obviously is my focus point, that's my reference point. And then from there, you start to decide the importance of areas. And that also determines how much detail you work into certain areas. Where you can start leaving things out. If it's an area that's not a focus point, it's just more like a supporting character in the drawing, you obviously don't need to spend as much time to detail it out. You can if you want to. You can if you want to. But this is mostly, generally speaking, for smaller scale drawings, where not everything is going to have the same, carry the same weight in how it adds to the realism of the drawing, basically. This is still just my F pencil, and I'm just working around on these bells, and mainly sometimes into kind of metal trim. So I'm just adding pencil and continuously just blending. Take my H pencil, blend that out as well. Just don't need to add more depth to that area. So obviously these are worn, and this one in particular, it's got like the way metal gets when it's maybe a bit dirty or showing age. It's not smooth, it's got marks on it and everything. Those are the types of things that I don't pay attention to in the beginning stages. It's very much something that you can add during the end layers, last layers. Just taking my little kneaded eraser to add some, or just take away some pencil. Can do the same for these metal bits. This is an H pencil, just cleaning up this area. Just kind of creating a better space for that highlight right at the end. This is a 4B pencil. Just for these little dark spaces. So I just gave it a quick sharpen just to help that along. And also in the metal trim itself, right here at the top, got a darker line, so I'm just using this 4B to define it. Obviously not too worried about almost being too precise, because we still got some cleaning up to do. And then down here at the bottom as well, just in this really darker space. I will go in, you can see almost stippling from the wear around the metal that catches the light. Those are also types of details that I will add in the end, because I know by now that with my layering I can afford to kind of build the depth to a certain point and the mono eraser will still work. So taking that 4B also down, using a lot light pressure here, because the definition, there's not a lot of depth, it almost melts together. Here it's a bit more, shows a bit more depth, a bit more contrast here as well. Just going to add in that nice little highlight there for contrast. Obviously these two bells are going to take the most work because they're very obvious texture, but we are mainly focusing on values for now. Just using that 4B just to add some definition. And just start to add the depth. You start with a very concentrated, more higher pressure, and then it's almost just a line, and then you start to blend it out into the space, just so that you kind of get rid of that harshness and blend that harshness out immediately with the pencil you are busy with. That just prevents lines, and you will sometimes still get lines. I mean, it's not going to be perfect every time, but just kind of start with that line of harder pressure, and then you instantly start to blend it out. Circular motions, and always vary your pressure. Your pressure doesn't always have to stay the same, especially if you move into areas that also has different values. You can kind of build that up as well, just with one pencil, starting to show kind of the differences in the values just by changing the pressure of the pencil you are using. just an F pencil. And what applies to your darker B grade pencils, the same will apply to your H and your Fs. They can also create lines, and they can indent your paper if you're not careful, which I'm not a fan of. And obviously if you go over areas like right now, with me going over with the F pencil over areas where there was a 4B, it will instantly kind of blend and deepen out that area where I used that 4B pencil. So you've got to keep that in mind as well, what pencils you are using to lay with, kind of the effect that will have on your depth that you're creating. Obviously we've got letters here, and in a kind of beginning, I think it was the third or the fourth part, I said I was still unsure whether or not I'm going to keep the lettering in the spell. All depends on whether or not I think I can create the correct look or not. If I feel like I'm struggling too much with it, I'm just gonna remove it completely, because it's one of those areas that contains an unnecessary detail. And what I mean by that, it doesn't, having it or not having it doesn't change the look of the drawing. It's kind of just an interesting little kind of Easter egg, or a little detail that you can add. But it's not something that is necessary to convey the realism of the drawing. It's not necessary to the structure of the object, it's not necessary for the texture of the object. It's just a nice little detail to add if you want to. It's a nice little detail to add if you think you have executed it properly. But if you struggle too much with it, and in the end it kind of detracts from the realism of it, it doesn't look part of the object, then I feel like it's one of those nice areas where it's not necessary to include it. Which is very much where you can kind of take your artistic license and just say, you know what, maybe on another day this would have worked out differently, but today I'm not in the mood to struggle. So I haven't decided yet. I'm still keeping it in for now. So I'm just using the mono eraser for the textures, very much like the metal. You don't need to be exact. As long as you keep it in the correct area, then it doesn't really matter what it looks like. As long as it resembles the reference, you don't have to be too precise about it. Just blending out those pencil marks that I made with the F pencil, and then also lightly going over where I used my mono eraser. Same here. You can use it in a similar fashion to the mono eraser, kind of create that stippling effect. Don't need to blend over the entire space. Just going to take my F pencil and fill in this area. Now here you will notice, if you look at the reference, you'll see there's a very slight little kind of highlight ridge surrounding the bell in this space, and also some very slight stitching as well on this kind of hidden metal piece. So you have to start looking for those little subtle highlights, those little subtle differences in values. There's a very interesting, I'm just gonna quickly, I noticed it yesterday. It's gonna be the easiest way to kind of explain what I mean by that little subtle highlights. So in the Trevi fountain that I'm drawing, this is going to be probably very difficult to see. But here in this space, you can see this little highlight ridge. This area is generally very similar in value with your little dark corners and stuff. But that little subtle strip of highlights, and the same is up here, and then you also got a very slight little difference in value up here. Those little highlights and little details and values becomes very important no matter the scale of your drawing, because that defines an area very slightly. But it's that very slight little difference in just that little line changes kind of what it almost gives that structure, the definition. It also shows that it's not just a black line, a black line, and a black line. It's actually something. Obviously you've got the little textural elements, but obviously if you're working on a smaller scale, you kind of got to pick and choose your elements to include. So that little subtle little highlight right there, and there's one right here as well. Those are the types of subtle value differences that I talk about that becomes very important in defining your spaces, defining areas, and those are the types of subtle things that you kind of need to take note of. And it's those types of things that you cannot exclude from your drawing. So I'm just going to take my, and you'll see that there's, just further define this area. There's some slight like highlight right there at the top, and those little kind of highlights is what defines these little muddy areas, along with your kind of dark little lines that you make. So this is just a 4B pencil that I'm just using beforehand, just to add a little bit of definition. Just the line there. So obviously you can just use your little dark area here to define the space, but it doesn't really give that extra special thing that moves it on towards the next level of realism. So those little highlights, those little specks of light in your darker shadows is what I feel takes your realism to the next step, because you can very much put in all your highlights in all the right places, but I think people, especially if they are beginners, they forget the definition in the shadows themselves. They get the definition within those tiny little spaces, those corners that are tucked away, maybe those areas underneath a mane or a forelock or underneath the tack, or the collar, those little shadows that just add that extra little element of realism. Because light does peek through to those areas. It does create definition in those areas, even if it's very slight. And those are the types of little details that definitely take your drawing to the next level. That definitely adds that step of more adds to that realistic feel, is because you've added that little glimmer of light that shows, that peeks through to those areas. Because this is not blocked off from your light source. The light comes in underneath and it still peeks through and catches certain areas. So those little subtle little slivers of extra depth or little highlights within your darkest areas is what I feel kind of gets lost. It's almost always overlooked. It's an untouched area, underused kind of area where you can really, really bump up the realism. And you can see just that very subtle little lines. It adds a different element of interest. It just shows you've paid a little bit more attention to the reference than just recreating what you see on face value. So you've actually spent some time looking at it. It shows that you understand how light interacts with its environments or the object. There's those little nice little touches, I think. That's really nice. So that's why I also kind of just do the layering, because it gives me time to notice those things and it gives you time to build up those little differences in values in darker areas like this. So this is an F pencil, so I'm just my mono eraser. There's a slight little highlight on that side and in here as well. Right, so I'm gonna move on to the rivets and then just do that thing and then move on to the chain. Just so that, so we're gonna just complete all these kind of darker values and add more substance basically. Okay, rivets. Let's start with the farthest one. I'm gonna go quickly sharpen up an HB. Actually, let's rather go I'm going to use a B pencil instead. Just gonna, this one's quite small, so I'm just gonna, oh, there's already one in there. Oh. Oopsie. Add it to my pencil extender. So I'm going to define the area around it first. So we've already got that little shadow or kind of, yeah, from the metal above it. I'm going to use this pink pencil to deepen up that. Then I'm going to use the H pencil, kind of blend that out. It's going to be a little bit more contrasted than it should be in the beginning, but that's fine. I'm just going to take a blending stump, blend out the other areas. Take my mono eraser, just clean it up. And add in our highlights kind of provisionally where they would be the ones that are the most important, and don't forget the ones on the edge as well. Moving on to the next one, B pencil in hand, define that top edge. So here the shadows are not as dark as that top edge of this rivet, so I'm just gonna remove the depth that I added there and just use the H pencil to put it back. And then once we work on the metal chain, we can kind of figure out how deep that should be. And also here on the side, clean up the shape. and then use the edge pencil to blend it out, add in kind of the rest of our little shadowed areas. Give it a blend and add in the beginning of our little highlights. So you're just going to pop around, do the same with all the rest of the rivets, the remaining 3. B pencil, H pencil, blend mono eraser. Okay, so we got those little basic little shapes in. So I'm going to move over top to here. I'm going to add this in. So just using my B pencil to define an H pencil just to fill in the gaps so long. Especially at the top here. There you go. I'm just going to use my blending stump to give that little wash. F pencil. Start to add your little definition marks. Give it a blend. This is one of those little things that I'm not going to pay too much attention to initially, just to get rid of that white space because it can be quite distracting. Okie dokie. Now let's move on. Metal. So I've already explained the method for these chains. So we're going to employ the exact same method. Depth, highlights. That's what we're going to do. We're only going to start adding more depths and playing around maybe with some of the in-between values. Obviously we don't have a lot of space to work with. So here I want you to kind of use your own discretion, because you can obviously see your most defined line of shadow and your most defined line of highlight. So I am probably not going to say much while I figure this out myself. Pencils I will be using, we will go all the way. I will tell you the pencils I will be using. I am giving my 7B a sharpen. I will keep my B pencil, F and H close by. I will kind of switch between those for my in-between values and use them to blend out the 7B pencil. Keep a cleaner blending stump close, and also whatever eraser you use for your finer highlights. So those are kind of what I'm going to use for defining these little middle pieces. So I'm going to get stuck in with it. I'm going to include these as well on the side. I'm going to work my way all the way up, and then also these. Don't know how long it's going to take, but yeah, we're going to spend some time there. Yeah, I want to, like I said, use a little bit of your own kind of discretion. We've kind of covered the basics of these little metal chains. You can take as long as you want. If you already started to do some work with it, then yeah, obviously you can do some more refining and so forth, but I've still got some work to do. So I'm gonna get stuck in with it. Hopefully it doesn't take too long, but I have a feeling it probably will. As I go along, I'm going to kind of define the depth around as well, just to make it easier on myself. Remember to vary your pressure. Just because you're using the 7B doesn't necessarily mean that you need to use hard pressure or use it to create its maximum kind of depth. Same goes for the other pencils you're using. So play around with your pressure. Don't need to use a pencil to its kind of maximum depth at all. And remember also what we spoke about earlier here by the bells. Don't just go in and make it black or dark. Just take a little bit of note to see if there's maybe an interesting little subtle shift in value in that little dark space, before you just go in and black it out, so to speak. Now I'm going to take just a brush, tap off the excess powder. Just gonna go over that. Give it all just a blend. And now we'll have a bit more substance for our highlights. And also we kind of filled in the gaps with the midtones and kind of given everything a bit more of a blend. So I'm just going to go through and add in our highlights. Not really gonna pay much attention to the reference. I'm just gonna kind of make it up as I go along. I've kind of seen how everything interacts with one another. Kind of the little elements that pop in and out here and there. And obviously this is not the final kind of stage. Still got some refinement to do, so I'm not too worried about kind of it being our last kind of pencil application to these areas. But it's much more filled in than it was before. This is just my 4B pencil. Light pressure. I'm not trying to add too much. Then I'm actually going to add a bit of powder to this blending stump and blending out this 4B. Just especially down here. So there's a bit of a better indication of where the value stands as of now. It's a bit difficult to see with all the lights and everything that filters in. Just took my monorays and added a bit more. All highlights. There we go. Okay, so that was part 6. Obviously didn't get as far as I would have liked to, but we got some decent stuff done, I think. Yeah, so this will probably be a slow one to the end. In the next part, we'll focus more on this side again and just continuing on with the detail work and stuff like that. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you for the next one. Cheers!